All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Steve Malzberg Show. Big show. Rick Santorum joins us in studio momentarily. I was at a luncheon with Ben Carson. We'll talk about that. And a terrible story out of Germany. We'll talk about that as well. But perhaps most disturbing of all, Barack Obama went ahead with his executive orders on guns. He even shed a tear or two. That's right, as he talked about the shootings that have taken place in the country. So let's sit back and watch some of that, and then Senator Santorum will weigh in on it all.
Our unalienable right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, those rights were stripped from college kids in Blacksburg and Santa Barbara, and from high schoolers at Columbine, and from first graders in Newtown, and from every family who never imagined that their loved one would be taken from our lives by a bullet from a gun. Every time I think about those kids, it gets me mad. And by the way, it happens on the streets of Chicago every day.
All right, and as promised, ladies and gentlemen, we're joined by Rick Santorum, former U.S. Senator, of course, and Republican presidential candidate. Website is ricksantorum.com. Great to see you in studio,
my friend.
Great to be in studio.
We do a lot of radio, but we don't.
We do.
Good.
Okay, so what's your reaction to the tears and the premise of the tears that the people who have been shot have lost their constitutional rights?
Yeah, I think the president is sincere about this. I think he cares about the people who have lost their lives. But I think he's a couple of comments need to put this in context. And one he made himself, which is the fact that there are people losing their lives every day in Chicago and across this country because of violence that we're doing nothing about. The fundamental problem that we need to address with respect to violence in poor communities across America is the breakdown of the nuclear family and the lack of parental involvement, particularly father involvement in the lives of young men. And the president was in a unique position as a president of the United States, an African-American male from a big city where this problem is the most acute. And he's done virtually nothing about it except focus on the object that's used in the commission of the crime instead of the fundamental underpinnings of why these crimes are being committed because of this breakdown of society caused by the breakdown of the family. Secondly, he talks about the constitutional right to life, and every time I hear that, here's a president who was for killing children after they were born if the mother wanted that child to be killed. I mean, he was against it in Illinois when he was in the Illinois legislature, voted against the Born Alive Infant Protection Act. So the idea that
hypocrite
that this president is out there talking in very passionate terms, and I think compelling and sincere terms about innocent lives lost, and has advocated for the taking of innocent lives through abortion and even through infanticide, and then sat on the sidelines as a person who could probably do more to solve the problems of the inner cities as an African-American president, and done nothing with respect to the helping and improving of the family. I just think that it's, again, the problem with liberalism is that it doesn't get to it looks for simple solutions that have good sound bites instead of looking at the fundamental problems that are a little bit more complex and difficult to deal with.
You believe the tears were heartfelt and sincere?
Look, I think you can, he was surrounded by people and he was engaged and involved. Look, I'm sure that brings about a certain level of emotion. I'm sure he was thinking of those kids, and I'm sure that did. Those are real tears. The problem is that they're not real solutions.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about your campaign, and let's start with your campaign commercial that's out recently.
I like green eggs and ham.
Ted Cruz is wonderful at reading children's fairy tales on the Senate floor.
Sam, I am.
Rick Santorum spent his time in the Senate a little differently. 8 years on the Senate Armed Services Committee, helping to modernize today's Army to better be prepared for today's threats.
Not all Muslims are jihadists, and no one would say that. But the reality is, all jihadists are Muslims.
You want someone to read one hell of a bedtime story? Ted Cruz is your guy. If you want to protect America and defeat ISIS, Rick Santorum's your president, because serious times need serious people.
Why did you go after Ted Cruz?
Well, because a couple of reasons. Number one,
last time you were here, you said he wasn't a true social conservative, and that made a lot of news. And now you're attacking him in your first ad.
Well, the issue here is not just Ted Cruz, but Donald Trump, and frankly the other candidates who are at the top of the list. None of them have any kind of real experience and record of accomplishment. And in fact, I would argue that a couple of them, and Cruz was one of them, have a pretty strong record of not accomplishing things and being very divisive and I don't think we need more of that in Washington. I think what we need is someone who's a fighter, but someone who can bring people together and accomplish something to get this country going. The reason I pointed out the accomplishments that I have on national security is because those accomplishments were done, again, in a contentious partisan environment, passed sanctions on Iran, which President Bush initially opposed, as well as Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, and Joe Biden. But we were able to push forward that. I was able to get people convinced and be able to impose those sanctions. That's what we need. We need someone who's a fighter, someone who can push an agenda that's going to get America back on the right track and make us safer, make us more secure, make us more prosperous, make us more sound in our communities, in our families. But we need someone who can accomplish those things. And I use Cruz as an example, and I use that particular speech as an example, as that was his filibuster of Obamacare. Right. Yeah. And the filibuster of Obamacare was a failed strategy that elevated one person and threw everybody else under the bus. And instead of, you look at what's happened recently. I know you probably know this, but this week, the House is going to vote to do what?
To
defund Obamacare. To do what Ted Cruz convinced the United States of America that nobody in the Senate wanted to do. He was the only guy. And then nobody else wanted to do it. Well, now the charge is being led not by him, but by those who he said were not for defunding Obamacare, right, have actually led the charge, gotten it done, and are going to put a bill on President Obama's desk. And so I used that because I thought that was the best example of saying, here's what divisive leadership is that accomplishes nothing. And here's what real leadership is that can make us safe.
Trump has been targeted by Christie. Jeb has targeted Trump, and Fiorina has targeted Trump. Yet you went after Cruz. Does this have to do with an Iowa strategy?
Well, clearly, I'm focused on the state of Iowa, but I used the Cruz example because I thought it was the best example to juxtapose to someone with a record of accomplishment in Washington and someone with a record of promotion and self-promotion in Washington. And I think we have an example over the past 8 years of someone who came to Washington to promote himself and to run for president. With no record of accomplishment, no idea of how to get things done in Washington. In fact, was a very divisive figure. I served with him in the United States Senate, Barack Obama.
And is that Cruz?
And I would say that we don't need for the Republicans to nominate someone with that same type of MO.
And at this point, what are you expecting from yourself, which it's now a little over 3 weeks away in Iowa, and if you don't get there, then I'm not looking to have you drop out, but what's your goal at this point? To win?
Yeah, but the goal is always to win. Right. And look, I 4 years ago, I went out there and made the case that we were the strongest conservative to defeat Barack Obama. A lot of the folks who are in this race right now passed. They said, that's a tough race, and we're going to sort of and Romney was sort of the 800-pound gorilla. I didn't pass because I knew this country was in trouble and we needed a conservative to go out and fight this battle. And I went out and fought that battle and came darn close in spite of very, very heavy odds against us, particularly coming into Iowa. That was at 3 or 4% in the polls at this point in time in Iowa. And we continue to work hard. We went and drew contrasts, as we're doing now, between myself and the other candidates in this race as to why we were the better conservative and why we were the best person to take on Mitt Romney and then eventually take on Barack Obama. And we're going to do the same thing going down the stretch here.
All right. Well, I wish you nothing but the best of luck,
Thank you,
obviously.
Steve.
And it's ricksantorum.com, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Steve.
And up next, ladies and gentlemen, the wife of Dr. Ben Carson, Candy Carson, will be here. And she has a great new book all about her life with the doctor called A Doctor in the House, My Life with Ben Carson. Could it be more aptly named? We're coming back.